of Pima County.
Sam Credio, City of Tucson.
Buster Burrell, Town of Marana.
Jose Rodriguez, Town of Oro Valley.
Alicia, Pima County Department of Environmental Quality.
Paul Casertano, Pima County Transportation.
Rick Ellis, PAG RTA.
Good morning, JD Brown.
David Zindig, PAG.
Jeanette Brown, PAG. Sonia Kelly with PAG.
And those online, I don't see the full list. If you guys want to introduce yourselves.
Scott Robidoux with Tucson Airport Authority.
Jason.
Patricia
Go ahead, Patricia.
Patricia Pavlo, Thon Autumn Nation.
Jason Bahe, Pasquiyaki Tribe.
Mark Hoffman, ADOT Planning.
Thomas Garcia, Town of Sarita.
Rod Lane, ADOT South Central District.
Mark Novak, University of Arizona.
Davida Mueller, Centran.
James Tao, PAG RTA.
Okay, thank you, everyone. We'll move down to item number 2, Jeanette Duran with the in-kind reporting.
All right, Madam Chair, members of the committee, regional transportation efforts are enhanced by recording time donated by attendees, volunteers, and participants. PAG collects data on the time dedicated to meetings and activities to apply for use as matching funds for grants and federal dollars. If you're paid with federal dollars, please let us know. Time spent in preparation for this meeting will be estimated by PAG staff who are knowledgeable on the agenda and meeting materials. At the conclusion of this meeting, the session report will automatically calculate your time spent in this meeting. Time spent working on PAG RTA initiatives, programs, and special projects may also be eligible for consideration for matching funds. We did send this sheet around. If you haven't signed in, please do so. And if you did some extra in-kind time spent on this meeting, make sure you document that for us. Thank you.
Okay, and we'll move on to the approval of the December 14th, 2022 meeting summary. Has everybody had a chance to review those notes? Are there any comments or clarifications to it? If none, is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Okay, moved by Sam Credio and seconded by Jose. All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed say no, nay. Okay, motion passes. We'll move on to item 4, updates to fiscal year 2024 through fiscal year 2028 Transportation Improvement Program Development Process. Mr. J.B. Brown.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to provide an update. So our current focus and focus of recent weeks has been preparing for the next TIP subcommittee meetings. We've got one scheduled for next week, as well as the following week if we need that additional meeting. And we hope to get materials out to you as soon as possible. We were hoping to get those out yesterday, but some things came up, so as quickly as possible. And the focus of next week's meeting will be on 3 different items. We want to bring forward updated TIP revenue projections. So at the last TIP subcommittee meeting, there was some comment about the projections and some recommendations. And so there was a provisionally approved set of projections, and so we want to bring those back for some adjustments made. We also want to bring forward an ADOT list. I believe it might be in the form of a TIP amendment covering several years, but we may also discuss fiscal years 27 and 28 in terms of ASTBG programming. It's not regional STBG, but state ASTBG. And then finally, the main focus will be on the RTA roadway element projects worksheet that was discussed at the November 30th. Sent that out after the meeting, November, asking for any additional information, project costs, local contributions, ineligible costs, things like that. And so we'll resend that to you before next week's meeting. And the focus will be on programming, having programming recommendations made for HERF 12.6 and any adjustments to STBG. So I do want to quickly just talk about what happened with that worksheet since last month's or November meeting. As you may recall, there was a recommendation to deprogram SDBG on a project that was not ready to obligate the current fiscal year. And as many of you know, with federal funds, it's kind of a use it or lose it situation. And so we appreciate hearing that recommendation to deprogram funds on that project. We were able to then issue a notice of funding availability, supplemental NOFA, and received a response from Pima County. And based on that response, we changed the amendment that was approved by the TPC last month. Last month's TPC meeting only included one item, that was the deprogramming item. So we added the program for Sunset to that TIP amendment. And we also heard from ADOT about some additional 2.6 funds that would be made available because of a project that closed out. And also the fact that the I-10 Inlet to Ruthven project also needed additional funds. And because both the Sunset project and the ADOT project are time sensitive, we've moved that through as an expedited amendment, adding to the item that was approved by TPC last month. So that was approved last week by the management committee, and we hope approval next week by the regional council. So again, just kind of going back to the committee exercise next week, where we're going to focus on PERF 12.6, because as you know, we have some additional 12.6 to program. We're going to really focus on which projects are truly ready for construction and have a need for additional funding. We'll go through that exercise and see how far we get in terms of programming recommendations for both 12.6 and any adjustments to SDPG. Based on that discussion, that's going to help us have a refined list of projects that are ready to go for construction, additional funding programmed on them to see if there are also funding gaps that maybe the RTA funds could help fill through, going through the RTA board process after a budget has been approved. So previously, as you know, we had RTA plan amounts that were the target for how much would be programmed on each project. And so we've met that with all the projects. Now we're in a different area where we're talking about additional funds on projects, but we don't have those targets across the board for all projects, right? So it's going to be on a case-by-case basis that we do program RTA. So with that, that concludes my update on the TIP development process, and look forward to next week's conversation. Happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. Are there any questions from the committee on this item?
Madam Chair, was there an invite for next week? I don't remember seeing one. Maybe I missed it.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee, Mr. Rodriguez. We did send out a save the date, but we can follow up with the Outlook calendar invitation with the link and the agenda and the items. We can, if we don't have all the items, we can just send the link and the agenda hopefully today, get that on your calendars. Did others see the save the dates? Okay.
Yeah, I know I responded. I'm not available the full time of the meeting, so I don't know. Hopefully there's enough for a quorum. Any other questions?
One last question. You said we're going to be looking at projects that are ready to go to use the money for construction. We're talking about still RTA projects, correct?
Yes, the focus next week is on
RTA
program.
I know you mentioned you're going to be sending the materials in advance. As detailed as you can send those materials, so we're not seeing things for the first time in the meeting, I think will make the best use of the committee's time next week. So I would request you do that. Jason?
Madam Chair?
Yes, Jason?
Yes, just an update from the tribe. Artemio is no longer with the tribe. He is now a Pima County employee, so I don't know who will replace him on the management committee, so I haven't heard.
Okay, thank you, Jason.
I mean, Madam Chair, to answer your question, it's Tuesday, January 24th from 9 till noon, or until we lose quorum. And so it sounds like this dinner will have to leave at 11. And then we have another meeting. We also asked you to save a date for the following week, Wednesday, February 1st, 9:30.
Are there any more questions on this item? Not, it was an information item only. We'll move on to item number 5, which is the Regional Mobility and Accessibility Plan update. For this, Ms. Jeanette Duran.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This was an item that we brought to the committee last month, and we were requested to bring some more information and answer some questions. So we continued this item to today's meeting. So I'm going to just turn it over to Mr. Zinda to answer any questions that you might have and kind of give a little update on where we are with this one.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Welcome to 2023. Hope you all had a wonderful holiday and ready to get back to work. Is there a lot of the assumptions? There. Okay, I can control that. Okay. I think we're just going to skip. This is from last time. This is kind of the table in question. So today we continue to look at the 2055 draft RMAP financial plan. I first presented these revenue forecasts to this committee beginning in summer of 2022. And since then, not much, if anything, has really changed. We first considered state and federal funding. If you recall, I broke down differences in the bottom line figures and the methodology between this draft financial plan for the 2055 RMAP and previous versions of the RMAP to be fully transparent on what I was changing and why. In December 2022, I presented much of the same to this body, but this time discussing local funding estimates, again documenting how what I was doing differed from what was done in the past and why. For the first time in over a decade, I invited member jurisdictions to provide local estimates from their own transportation departments in the spirit of collaboration and recognition that I cannot adequately guess how much local funding you might be willing to put up for the RMAP in this exercise. I first solicited estimates from you all last summer, and I followed up with each jurisdiction a few weeks ago to verify your estimates. So thank you for your participation and partnership in shaping this consequential transportation plan. In continuity with the transparency of methodologies and figures presented during the development of the financial plans and the 2045 RMAP and the 2045 RMAP update, I'll walk you through some key figures and assumptions. What you have in front of you in your packet is more information on the sources and assumptions of revenue estimates than found in any of the plans of the 2045 RMAP or the 2045 update, which would only have bottom line figures, no sources of where those funds came from, the assumptions or the growth rates are not found in those documents. As mentioned earlier, I also formally discussed key differences between this RMAP financial plan and previous 2045 version last summer, which to my knowledge had not been shared in this committee before. I also want you to know that I strictly appeal to authoritative sources found in your packet to justify these estimates. Simply put, there is really very little, if anything, I create out of whole cloth. Federal funding uses growth rates that are enshrined in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act legislation itself. Her forecasts are directly from ADOT. RTA forecasts are estimated by a professional economist at one of the most prestigious public business schools in the nation. And members of this very committee provided me with local estimates. So as I did in July and December of 2022, I'll provide an overview of funding found in this plan. And I am asking for approval of the growth rates and sources of funding found in the right-hand column that says assumptions. I have not updated these numbers with the latest and greatest numbers because I am seeking approval of the methodology before I apply that methodology once again to updated apportionments and so forth. So Surface Transportation Block Grant Program, the starting number is 21.3 million. This is the total apportionment awarded to PAG in federal fiscal year 2022. From that point, I apply a 2% growth rate each year in year of expenditure terms. Over the last 10 years, STBG has increased in the PAG region by 2.5%. The IIJA has a slated 2% growth rate each year for STBG nationally. From federal fiscal year 2022, the first year of the IIJA, to federal fiscal year 2023, the second year of the IIJA, our STBG increased 1.5%. For a 30-year horizon, 2% strikes me as a good and safe growth rate to apply to the 21.3 million apportionment, which was in 2022, which applied through 2025 and summing from 2024 to 2025 or 2055, excuse me, get you $980 million. When you discount these values using a 2% inflation rate, very standard rate for horizons like this, you get 61.6 million. This number will change. I'll update it with the federal fiscal year 2024 value if timing allows, at least with the 23 value. Furthermore, in consultation with ADOT, it was recommended that I apply an obligation limitation rate of 91.3%. And once I update all these numbers, I will apply this rate accordingly. Since these numbers will change, I'm only asking for your approval on the underlying methodology to use that methodology to create an updated forecast. ASTBG, the starting number for this estimation is the average of programmed amounts found in the fiscal year 2022 through 2026 TIP before any amendments, since this was started last year. At the time of the development of this figure, the average amount from fiscal year 2022 through 25, since I think last time I checked and made this estimate, there was no 2026 for ASTBG, was about 90,086,145. From there, a 2% growth rate was applied. And since this funding source is largely, if not entirely federal in origin, I wanted to make sure it was in continuity with the 2% for all federal sources. This number will likely change as we develop a new TIP and therefore have new data points to take a new average, to have a new starting point, which is why I'm only asking for approval of the methodology and not the numbers themselves. Our tag is the STBG set aside, which increased under IIJA. I followed the same process in estimating our tag as I did STBG, since they are one of the same. I took the federal ledger amount from federal fiscal year 2022 and applied a 2% growth rate each year for the horizon. This number will change as we update the estimates using the latest federal ledger amounts, which is why I'm only asking approval for the methodology. FTA grants, as described in the assumptions column there, use the average programmed amount from the TIP, except for 5310, which uses the latest grant award. 5310 is worded differently than the others, which is why it is a bit of a special case. The IIJA increases FTA apportionments by 2% each year, and I do the same. The average amount of 5307 is about 15 million, 5339 is about 1.8 million, almost 1.9. I won't go through all of them, but you can verify it in the TIP. From those numbers, the forecast was made using a 2% growth rate. Since a new TIP is being developed, these numbers will be updated, which is the reason why I'm only asking for approval of the methodology and not the numbers. Competitive grant uses historical grant amount since 2010 multiplied by 2.5. Previously, we assumed one large Sunlink-like grant per decade in the RMAP. I have been a little bit more conservative by multiplying by 2.5 instead of 3, since there are 3 decades through 2055. And so that total amount for grants on 2022 terms, based on the grants we received in the last 10 years, is about 287 million. I divided that number by 3 and put a third in the beginning of each decade, 95.7 million in 2030, 95.7 million in 2040, and also in 2050, this again in 2022 terms. I apply a 2% inflation rate to bring these figures from a 2022 dollar denomination to a year of expenditure in the standard way, calculating future values they would teach you in an introductory finance course. PERC 12.6 and 2.6 is copied directly from ADOT Financial Management Services. I do have to extrapolate it through 2055 since the official forecast ends in 2032, though they provide an extrapolation for the next 10 years. That extrapolation uses a declining growth rate that follows the same growth trend as implied in the ADOT official forecast. This was presented, I think, in December or included in your packet. These numbers will be superseded in October 2023, which is why I'm only asking for approval to use a source and not approval as the figures as presented at this time. ADEQ uses a small growth rate of 50 basis points or 0.5% since it never really changes. However, we recognize that anything could happen in 30 years. And so a similar program could arise that provides funding for these kind of requirements. RTA uses official Eller Business Research Center estimates from a professional economist. I do not touch this at all. This estimate will be updated in September 2023, which once again, I'm just asking approval for the source, not the numbers as presented. MOE, Maintenance of Effort Funds, uses statutory formula enshrined in the Arizona Revised Statutes, Chapter 48, Part 5308, subsection F, to forecast through 2055. In 2022, there was just shy of 46 million of MOE according to our financial records. This is computed based on the fiscal year 2004 general fund contributions to transit in our region and increased each year based on the GDP deflator to account for inflation as it is prescribed in Arizona Revised Statutes. Standard convention usually suggests 2% for an inflation rate, especially for a horizon like this. That rate is applied to generate the year of expenditure denominated estimate for MOE. Local budgets come from your own estimates. From 2023 through 2032, the total amount of local funding, which you gave me, was $826,106,305. That implies an average of 82.6 million each year. I then take that number, I apply a 1% growth rate each year on 2022 terms. In December, I asked if this was a fair assumption, and I don't think anyone provided comment to my recollection. Coming in at $2.8 billion in 2022 terms, this estimate is substantially less than the amount of local contributions in the current and previous RMAP by billions when they were estimated in-house. Local transit currently uses 20% of the recent total operating expenditures of SunTran, SunLink, and SunVan as a basis to apply a 2% growth rate in year of expenditure terms. According to publicly available reports found on SunTran's website, which I think used to be, maybe still are, produced by PAG, total operating expenditures for these three transit services were $76.6 million in fiscal year 21. 20% of that is 15.3 million. This number will be updated if I can get latest information, which is why I'm only asking approval for the methodology. So in short, I provided you the sources of my estimates, externally verifiable with the links in your packet. You know how I chose certain forecasts, how I use those numbers, and what growth rates I chose and why I chose them, if I chose them, if I didn't just copy the forecast from someone else. This information has now been largely available and discussed since July 2022, or about 6 months, and has been discussed in this committee 3 times now. Furthermore, I provided the same, if not much more information on this financial plan than has been provided to this committee during the development of both the 2045 RMAP and the 2045 RMAP update. Also, what I have provided you today in terms of revenue estimates alone is consistent with best practices. I have surveyed long-range transportation plans of several peer MPOs, including Maricopa Association of Governments, Wasatch Front Regional Council, El Paso MPO, Mid-Region Council of Governments in New Mexico. And what you see today is consistent with the information they provide in their regional transportation plans. In fact, I use these as an inspiration to craft this plan. As I mentioned to you, most of the funding sources will need to be updated, but I want you to approve the methodology used to generate these figures before I systematically begin recreating them with the latest and greatest numbers. This is why I'm only asking for approval of the methodology, not the actual line-by-line figures at this time. And I think with that, I don't think I have anything more to add. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, David. Are there any questions from the committee on this item?
I have a
Sam?
question, Madam Chair. David, can you explain to me again the methodology on the local transit item? It says you're using 20% of recent total operating expenditures. And that information was obtained from their website. Can you just recap that again for me?
Yes, SunTran, SunLink, and SunVan are here to provide annual reports that show the total operating expenditures, revenue collected each year. This one is admittedly a little tricky, right? Because there are several different forces that make estimating this a little bit opaque. First of all, 2019, I don't think was a terrible year for transit. 2020, not a great year for transit. 2021, we're starting to get back on track. The reports that I have available, and this would include what I have available in our own data sources, don't really go back all that far. So in consultation with Mr. DeGroot, who was with us at the time, and we had a lot more turnover in our transit team, he said an aspirational target would be about 20% of local recent operating expenditures to be used as a proxy for what we should be collecting in terms of fares. Now, I do understand that fares are not being collected at this time, which, luckily we might have some more clarity on that by next June as this continues to be updated, and we can talk about this more presumably as we get the latest information.
Okay, so the 20% is fare box return
Correct.
on the transit system.
Other questions from the committee? I appreciate you providing so much more info on kind of the starting point for where all these things grew from. On the local budgets, I'll just mention, 80% of the county's numbers that they put in are tied to our pavement program. And so when we get to the next step in the RMAP development, the project list, I'll anticipate that the size of that line item, that project will be in that equivalent size range. So that's something for us to keep in mind moving forward.
Did you include the payment funding on this one?
I did not include anything for locals, just the funding going towards the arterial and collectors. And so, yeah.
That's what we did too. I didn't include payment management and all that. So I
Exactly.
wanna make
So
sure
I
we're
didn't do
on the
any
same.
of our locals. But it's still a significant portion of the funding that's going towards the regional transportation network. And I know that in the existing RMAP, it's not that big of a percentage of the project list, but it'll probably have to grow in the upcoming.
Sure. Madam Chair, we did request a motion on this one if the committee is so inclined. Crystal, maybe you can pull that up, but it should be in your packet. It's also on the agenda. That should be in the presentation at the end.
If there's a motion printed in our agenda, and
It's on the agenda item.
anyone care to make that motion?
Motion. For the methodology.
Moved by Jose, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Pasto. All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed say nay. Motion passes. Thank you, David. We'll move on now to agenda item 6, the regional transportation revenues. Again, that's the agenda.
Oh, I'm not done yet. Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. I don't think there's anything too out of the ordinary to report on this standing item. So unfortunately, there was a little bit of lag by the time we get them ADOT reports and by the time we're able to take them through and post them in the committee packet. So we only have information through November of 2022. At that point in time, our regional total of all HERF, direct HERF, 12626 and BLT was just shy of $71 million. That's about a 0.3% growth compared to last time during that part of the fiscal year, almost 10% higher than the 5-year average. Turning to table 3, the HERF 12.6 report, the official ADOT forecast for the year is 27.176 million. Through November, we should expect to see just shy of 11.5 million, and we have exceeded that target. We're 2.23% higher than where we would be forecasted under that straight line estimate. And compared to 2022, 4% higher. Turning to table 4, the HERF 2.6 report, same old story as with the HERF 12.6. We seem to be doing higher than what was forecasted and higher than what we had seen this prior year. Going to table 5, HERF 12.6 balances. November 2022, we had just shy of 53 million in our accounts. Year over year increase of about 53.16%. Table 6, when it comes to gasoline, we are in the 13% target as we like to do, and perhaps exceeding it even a little bit, as you can see that little blip crossing the blue line on the graph. Unless there are any questions, I think that's all I have.
Are there any questions from the committee? I have one question. Table 5, the HERF 12.6 balances. What do you attribute this growth in that balance of 12.6 to? Are there not projects in the region ready to build?
Yes, thank you for your question, Madam Chair. I believe a lot of this is accumulating in part because of rollovers, for one, from this last fiscal year to the current fiscal year. And yes, projects that have been programmed HERF 12-6 funding who have not had any expenditures to draw down on those yet.
And I think, Jamie, you mentioned in our tip item, this will be something that we're kind of looking at more closely when we're developing the next tip to make sure that we start to spend those down.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Are there any other questions on this item? Hearing none, we'll move on to item number 7, future agenda item.
Madam
Sam.
Chair, yep, in the meeting minutes, there was a few that were listed as pending items to bring forward to TBC. One in particular the city's interested in is the pavement management discussion. We'd like to request that on the next agenda. That'd be great.
Second that.
That's all I have.
Madam Chair, I'd also like to request another item on there be put on the next agenda, the carbon reduction program.
Okay, on the February agenda.
Yes, please.
Any other items we'd like on a future agenda? Okay, and our carryover from the last meeting in February is probably already getting full, but we'd like to see the safety items. Report out from TSS, the trends keep going up from safety. And I know this is a committee that has an opportunity to discuss what we might do to help curb that. So future agenda item for safety. There's no other items to add. We move on to adjournment.
Second.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.